In today's video, which is the second part of the three-part series for AWS Bedrock course, we will only be focusing on writing all the code we need for our Lambda function and talk about what it is and what it does. So let's get started coding. All right, now we're gonna actually start coding our Lambda function. So up in the search bar in your main AWS console, you can type in Lambda, and this will bring up your Lambda function. Now, what is a Lambda function? Well, it's basically a serverless compute service that allows us to run code for applications and backend services without managing or provisioning services. Okay, you may not see the same screen I do because I already have one created. So we're gonna go ahead and create a new function. So click the create function on the top right, and we have some information here. We are going to author from scratch, but you can also use a blueprint, which is like presets for common use cases, or we can select a container image to deploy for the function. So let's go and just give the function a name. So this is Bedrock code generation. The runtime is this is going to be done in Python, so we're going to choose Python 3.12. The architecture is fine, so we can go ahead and click Create Function. Okay, great. We have now created our first Lambda function, and it does have test code for us. Now, this function right here, Lambda handler, is something that we will need, and we'll get to that when we're done coding. By the way, if you like all the code that I used and all the information about the services that we are using, click the link below, sign up for my free newsletter, and you'll get a free PDF about all the information needed for this Bedrock course. All right, so one of the things that we need to do first is go to the configuration, then under general configuration, see the timeout is set to 3 seconds. We're going to need to increase that, so choose edit, and then in the timeout, you can just go ahead and do 3 minutes. I mean, we won't actually need the full 3 minutes, but just so we don't have to worry about it. Then click save, and now we can begin coding. So go over to the code section, and here we are. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this, and we're going to code all this from scratch. Okay, well, the first thing we need to do is import some libraries. So the first one is going to be import Boto3, and this is the library to have access to a lot of the AWS services, including Bedrock. And then we're also going to import boto core.config, import JSON, and then also from date time, import date time. This is going to be to help us when we save the file to S3, we can just save it and give it the name based off of the time. Okay, and then our first function is going to actually be to generate the code. It's going to be called define generate code. And we're going to take in 2 parameters here, the message, which is going to be a type string, and then the language we want to actually write or have the AI write the code in is going to also be a string. And we want this to return a string. And now I mentioned in the beginning of this where the prompting matters based on the AI model. So we're going to be using the Claude version 2 model, and we need to have a specific prompt text. If we go back to Amazon Bedrock, go to Claude, and we choose Claude 2. This right here, this prompt, this /n human hello world and assistant, this is what matters right here. Okay, so I can just simply copy this, come back here, and I'm going to have a variable called prompt underscore text, and then we need to format this. So we have triple quotes, and then what matters is spacing. If you don't have the spacing correct for the prompt text, then you're going to get like an internal server error whenever we try to run this. And we may anyways whenever we go to do this. But I'm going to copy in the prompt text that we needed from the model. And we can go ahead and get rid of these first 2. I know that it says that it needs, I can like hit enter here and that's what it really needs. But I tried that, and you actually need to give 0 spaces from the start of the triple quotes in order for this to work. And then we can also get rid of this, and this does require just one tab or one enter or a return line. So instead of hello world, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to type write language. So this is the language we want to write. So we're going to say write Python, for example, code for the following instructions. And then we can say message here. So we're going to say write in the language, and then the message is going to be whatever from our API call we want to maybe write a function that reverses a string, whatever it is, right? Whatever function or thing you want this code to generate for you, this will be the message here. Okay, so this makes it dynamic, right? So from this function, we can keep calling whatever we want and we'll automatically put this in the prompt for us. Now what we need is the actual body. So if we actually just go back here, see we have a body that we need to give it, and we'll also need this model ID here. The content type and the accept, okay, we don't need that, but the model ID and the body. But first, let's take care of this body. So we have some other parameters here like max tokens to sample, temperature, top K, top P, and stop sequences that we'll need. So if we come back here, so we're going to say body, which is the variable, is equal to, and then the first one is the prompt, and we're just going to give this the prompt text that we already created. And then we're going to say max tokens to sample, and we can start this out with 2048. And then we're going to also have a temperature. Now we don't want this to be too crazy, so we'll say 0.1 so that it kind of just does exactly what it says. That the higher you make this, then the more likely it will try to vary from what you initially wanted to do. And then for the next one, we'll say top underscore K, we'll just make this 250. And then top underscore P, we can just make this 0.2. And then we can have our stop sequences. And then we'll say what we need for this is /n/n human. If we come back here for the stop sequences, that's exactly what we need here, right? This /n. It has extra slashes there, but we only need the /n/n human. Okay, cool. Now we need to get ready to set up to call the actual model and give it this prompt till we get something back. So we're gonna say try bedrock is going to be equal to boto3.client, and we're gonna have bedrock dash runtime. Oh, oops, sorry about that. And then we need a region underscore name, and we're going to be using US East 1. That's where I'm at. So US dash East dash 1, comma, and then we also need a config, and this is going to be equal to boto core.config.config, and then we're going to say read underscore timeout is equal to 300 milliseconds, so 5 minutes, and then retries. We're just going to give a max attempts of 3. We don't need to give this too many. And then we're done with that. We can say we need a response back from the model that we're about to call. So we're going to say response equals bedrock dot invoke underscore model. And then the body is going to be equal to JSON dot dumps the body. And then we also need the model ID, which is going to be equal to. Then if we come back to Amazon Bedrock, we can see this is the model ID right here. So this is the actual API request, right, that we're about to make. We're going to say bedrock.invoke model, and we need this model ID and the body. So I can just copy this here, come back, and then for the model ID, paste that in right there. And we're done with this. Okay, so we're going to get a response back from invoking the model, and we need the body and the model ID. Okay, great. Now for the content, we're going to say response underscore content is equal to response dot get, and then we get the response back from the body dot read, and then we need to decode this using UTF-8, UTF-8. And then the response underscore data is equal to we're going to need to load this now as JSON. So JSON.loads, and then the response underscore content. And then the code that now, again, we're actually having it generate code for us. So the code is going to be equal to the response underscore data, and then it's going to be the completion, right? So the completion, again, is the output from calling the model. So we give it a prompt, right? So the prompt will be write some language code for the following instructions, and whatever we want it to generate for us. The completion is the output from that prompt, and then we just need to strip. We're going to say dot strip, and then we're just going to return the code. And now, because this was a try, we need to have the exception here. So we can say except exception as E, and then print. Then we can say format, and then error generating the code. And then in brackets, put that E, and then return E. Okay, awesome. We are done with this method. Again, so for defining the generate code, it's going to take two parameters, a message and a language. The message is what we actually want the AI model to create for us, and the language is whatever Python or whatever language, programming language you want to be written in. Now, you don't need this, right? The model itself will be able to determine what language just by the prompt, right? You really don't need this, but the idea is if you wanted other parameters in here, this is just to give you an example of how to use multiple parameters, okay? And then the prompt text, this is formatted based on the model. The body here, these are all the parameters that we need for this model as well. So these are all listed in the API request based on the model that we're going to use. And then we use the boto3.client to connect to Bedrock runtime service. We need the region and then a configuration for this. We're using bedrock.invoke model to actually call the model. This is really the API request right here, right? So if you come back here to the API request for this model, the model ID and the body, right? This is the actual API request here. And then we basically format the response that we're getting back so we can actually return the code generated. Now, the next thing is we're going to save this to S3 bucket. Okay, so we're going to have a function to do that. So we're going to say def save code to S3 bucket. And then we're going to take in three parameters, right? Code, the actual S3 bucket, and then the key for that bucket. And then what we need is say S3 is equal to boto3.client, and then the service is S3. This is going to be a simpler function, so we're going to say try, and then we need to say S3.put object. So this is going to actually put the object into the S3 bucket. I know that may seem simple, but if you never used S3 before, especially through an API, the S3.put object is going to actually save whatever we give it into the S3 bucket for us. So the bucket is going to be equal to S3 underscore bucket. The key is going to be equal to S3 underscore key. And then the body is going to be, we're going to give the code for the body. Then we can say print the format. I always like using this, using the format, the string, and then code saved to S3. And then the actual bucket was S3 underscore bucket. And then we need an exception here. So accept exception as E, print, and then format again, error, saving to S3. And then we're just going to give the error here. And this is great because we're going to use something called CloudWatch logs, which that will print all these errors for us if we get errors, right? We may get like permission errors, right? We may still run into something related to a permission error. And this is going to allow us to see in the CloudWatch logs what that was. Okay, we are done with these two functions. We only have one more left, and that is the required Lambda handler function. All right, I'll give you some more room so we can see here. So we're going to say def lambda handler takes in two parameters, the event and the context. So we're going to say event body is equal to json.loads event body. Okay, so we want to get the body parameter here and save that into the event body variable. And then from there, we can say message is equal to event body, and then we want to actually get the message from there. And then we're going to say language is equal to event body language. Okay, so just to summarize this really quick, whenever we have the API service call, which we're going to be using through the gateway API service, when we go to test this, we're going to be giving it from a post request, we're going to be giving it a message and a language property in JSON format. So the Lambda function is going to get this event. We're going to extract the message and the language. So the message, again, is what we want the AI to create or generate for us and in the certain language that we want it to. And then based off of this, now that it has that information, the next line is we can say generated code is equal to, and then back up here, we can call this generate code function, which then ends up invoking the AI model to generate something for us. Okay, so from the API request, we have what we need to tell the AI to do something for us. So generated code is equal to generate code, and then we give the message and the language. And if this did give us something, we're going to say if generated code. Okay, so if we have generated code, what we want to do now is get ready to save this outputted or generated code to the S3 bucket. We need to do a couple things first before we save to S3. So we're going to say first, say the current time is equal to date time dot now dot strf time, which is a string formatted time, and we're going to say percent %h percent %m and then percent %s, and this is hour minute second. And then we're say S3, the key for S3 is going to be the code output slash the current time dot py. Okay, so when we go to save this into S3, this is going to be the name of the Python file. I know that I'm going to save it to Python, so that's why I'm putting the py extension here. And so if you wanted to make this a little bit more dynamic, right, we could also have another parameter up here saying extension, and then what you could do is pass in the extension, and then eventually you could come down here and say whatever the extension is through the API. So if we had an extension variable here, we could say event body extension. All right, and then this extension would go right here. Okay, but we don't have to do that. I'm going to revert this back, but that's just something added if you want to do that. But I know for the purpose of this course, I just want to write Python files. Okay, and then the actual S3 bucket, which we haven't created just yet, and we will get there, is let's just call this Bedrock bucket. And now simply we need to call or invoke our save code to S3 function that we created above. So we're going to say save code to S3 bucket generated. So we're going to first pass it the generated code, and then we need the S3 bucket and then the key. Okay, great. Now this is going to save. If we got here successfully, it will save to the S3 bucket. Else, we just want to print no code was generated. And if there was no exception at this point, we want to return some status code, right? When we test this through Postman, again, this is going to be wrapped in an API request call. So we want to turn something back to us or the user that, this was successful. So we're going to return, we're going to say status code. We'll just say 200, right? I'm going to hard code this as 200. We could have other things in here to make this more dynamic, so this is more accurate, but we're just going to do this for the course purpose. Then the body, we're going to say json.dumps, so it's in the correct format when we go to return this back to the user. Code generation is complete. Okay, great. Now, what if we had an exception though? We need to take care of that. So we had to try. Let's say except exception as e. Some more room here. And we'll say print f. There was an exception in the handler e, and then we want to return, and we want to turn a different status code, right? So the status code, if this is not a correct status code, this is just so I know that is different. Again, this should be more dynamic if you were actually making this something for production, but this is just for our purpose. So the body is we're gonna say for the body json.dumps code was not successfully generated. Now we're done. Whew. That was a lot, but now we are done with all of the code changes. Now, to review, we're going to be calling this Lambda function. It's going to take this event, take in the message in the language that we give it from the API request, try to generate code by invoking the AI model. If it does, then we're then going to save it to an S3 bucket. And if that's all successful, we'll then get a status code of 200 back. Okay, well, let's go ahead and deploy this. Okay, successfully updated the function Bedrock code generations. Okay, so now that we're done with the code, we can't really test this yet because first off, we haven't even created the S3 bucket to save there. So it's just going to fail at that point regardless. But one thing we need to do is actually update our permissions that I forgot to do before this. So if you go back to configuration, go to permissions, and then you have a role name here. So if you click this, okay, what we need to do here is if you don't have this already, you're going to click add permissions, attach policies, and you're going to choose the administrator access which will be one of the top ones here. Okay, so go ahead and you'll click that, come down, and then choose add permissions down here. And then once you've done that, this will be here, right? Then we need to give this access for this users that we can actually generate code through Bedrock. Okay, and then if you come back to the Lambda function, if you refresh the page, now if you come down here, you should have like a resource that says all. Okay, well if you had fun doing all of that coding inside of our Lambda function, well then you have to watch the next video because we're gonna be wrapping everything up and creating our S3 bucket, the API gateway service, and testing with Postman. I'll see you next video.